Holy shit. What is this?
That's a prop.
Horses are supposed to represent courage and freedom, and to cut off its head. That's America right there.
Anyways, The Offer, what you're saying about the impressions, that people are trying to do the most impression, it works precisely once.
Interesting. Which one for you?
Evans.
Oh, the Evans performance is incredible. I think he's the one guy in that show who understands exactly what show he's in. He understands the assignment. I think it's genuinely a beautiful performance. When I try to push the pill, I try to encourage people to get off their pill, right? It's one of those things where it's hard to explain to people. I'm not saying this show is so bad, it's good, you need to watch it. I'm also not saying it's genuinely great. I'm saying this exists in some weird temporality different from everything else I've ever seen. It is just so bizarre and compelling. And you'll go through cycles of feeling like revulsion to then feeling like complete obsession with what you're watching. But it exists, like every performance is on such a different wavelength in terms of realism, in terms of energy, in terms of accuracy, all of that. And then you get to Matthew Good, and he's the one guy where it's like, he's playing a known figure who's been mocked so thoroughly, was sort of a little bit of a self-parody to begin with.
Was it the kid stays in the picture?
Yeah.
It's that. He's no more or less ridiculous in real life.
Absolutely. But also, like, he makes it into a character of genuine pathos. You actually care about what he is going through, which is astonishing because I don't think Robert Evans is innately sympathetic as a person.
Good plays him as so winning. Like, there's this weird, genuine fervor for art that is in his character.
Yes.
I mean, even when he's like hungover and clearly high still and pitching like Chinatown, you know, and the famous line, Los Angeles, water, Nicholson.
Yeah, that's the pitch.
There's a guy, Nicholson's character, and he's trying to find out what's going on. It's Los Angeles, water in Los Angeles, and Nicholson.
You buy every myth Robert Evans told about himself when Matthew Good is playing it. Part of what is so fascinating about that show to me is that it's like Paramount spending who knows how many tens of millions of dollars to devote 10 hours to this sort of like self-congratulatory, the history of Paramount, look at us saving the movies kind of thing. And you're like, you would never make a movie like this today. You are so much more eager to make 10 hours congratulating yourselves for making The Godfather 50 years ago than to ever make a risk like this again. The story of this movie is like artists needing to triumph over the studio system that is very skittish about taking any risks. And you are being so risk adverse in everything you do these days, but also wanting the credit for having done it once. Obviously, entirely different people, you know, leadership than is involved in this. But you watch this and you watch the scenes of like Evans in particular fighting for The Godfather, and you're just like, I wish we had guys like this within the studio system today. As much as there are terrible, terrible fucking things about Robert Evans, he has the scenes where he goes in there, he's like, we're not making business, we're making classics, or whatever he says. And I fucking believe it. This guy got The Godfather made.
At least he's a cocaine fiend with artistic ambitions.
That's my thing. I'm like, the shitbags at studios used to actually like movies. And The Offer is kind of detailing the moment where that begins to shift, where you have like Gulf and Western, you have these companies coming in and buying the studios and being like, this is a business. And it used to be disgusting crass businessmen who also liked movies and had some understanding of the craft. Evans is like one of the final guys at that scale, arguably. The performance is so good.
For me, I kind of put The Offer in a category with like Rise of Skywalker for me, where to me, the story is not the story that's in the film. It's not the diegetic narrative.
Yes.
The story is watch a studio sweat for 2 or 10 hours.
Yeah.
Watch them rearrange deck chairs so that, you know, in The Godfather's case, erase all the less savory stuff. Romanticize Joe Colombo of all people. Or
so
in
bizarre.
The Rise of Skywalker, just try to do their best to please both their board of directors and their increasingly toxic fan base.
And there's the weird circular thing of like, okay, this is like one of the big debut projects from Paramount Plus. Paramount is trying to get in the business of like branding themselves as meaning something again as a company. As all these companies like pull their own stuff back and start their own streaming services, it's like what they all want is the thing that only Disney has, which is like Disney as one word means something to most people. They understand which movies are Disney movies, and Paramount has to make something like The Offer to be like, understand this is the legacy of Paramount. This is the history of Paramount. We're making you feel important about Paramount as an idea.
Just in case you forgot, which you all did.
Right. We're trying to like quantify what Paramount is, which is basically them just like taking victory laps for Robert Evans' New Hollywood run and being like, we're Paramount. Look.
Bizarrely, from the point of view of the other guy, Miles Teller's character, Al Ruddy. I love that show. This is obviously episode 1 of The Offercast.
Yes, The Offercast.
Welcome to How Would Al Ruddy Do It, the podcast in which we discuss the 2022 Paramount Plus miniseries The Offer, one episode at a time. World's biggest fans of The Offer, spending 10 hours talking about The Offer.
10 hours per episode, so it'll be a combined 100 hours.
We want to be to The Offer what The Offer is to The Godfather temporarily.
We want to break it up.
Yes.
This is my pitch. My friend Jordan Fish and I have had this idea that season 2 of The Offer should be about the making of The Offer. We should just keep going further up its own ass.
Oh my gosh.
You're telling me you want 10 hours about Al Ruddy?
Oh my gosh, can you imagine? Just like trying to get Matthew Good to find someone to play Matthew Good playing Robert. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
I also think they should reuse the same cast. So like Matthew Good should play whoever the equivalent is at Paramount right now. But there's a scene where he's watching Zoom auditions.
And he just gets fully into the most boring man in the world.
Yes.
You know what? As interesting as Robert Evans was, I'm going to own this boring.
Yes.
Method boring.
Yeah. You just can't take my eyes off of it. Yeah.
But yes, Ernst Lubitsch, apparently.
Yes.
I think I'll go to a movie. What's playing in the village?
Ninotchka. How's that?
Much better.
Welcome to Season 5 of How Would Lubitsch Do It, a podcast in which we discuss the works of director Ernst Lubitsch, one film at a time. It's 1939, and Griffin Newman joins us to discuss Ninotchka. Come visit ernstcast.com if you'd like show notes, resources as to where you might find the films we'll be discussing, a link to our Discord, or just to say hi. Hi, everyone. Can you imagine if I use that as like the intro and just confuse everyone for like 10 minutes? Very on brand for trolling me, but not on brand for disciplined
Podcast. Serious podcaster.
I think you're probably one of the first like people I've had on the podcast who is not, I think, primarily known for like having a PhD or something.
They very much don't have a PhD. Yeah, we should make that very clear. Yeah.
And as someone who also is like, I have a BFA in film production.
Sure.
You remember that Simpsons episode where Krusty the Clown, you got the old Krusty where he's talking to the labor crisis guy? He's like,
the Steve Allen Krusty.
Yes, the Steve Allen Krusty. And he has the full clown makeup on, but he has the suit.
Let me be blunt. Is there a labor crisis in America today?
Well, that depends what you mean by crisis.
That's how I feel I am at all times. So I finally feel...
You have a guest on who knows less than you do.
I feel a different type of imposter syndrome.
Sure.
In this case, I think I've only recorded 50 podcasts in my life. And each of them was like in my living room.
Sure.
So I'm now traveling Canadian in the Big Apple.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you so much for coming on. I have not introduced you. It is Griffin Newman.
Hello.
Griffin, I have 2 questions for you. One, who are you? I ask this of everyone. Who are you?
The hardest question of all.
Exactly. Yeah. Who are you really? 2, what in God's name provoked you to like say yes to coming on this weird Canadian cinematographer's podcast about a German, Jewish, Russian, American film director who's been dead for over, I must remind everyone, 75 years at this point?
That's wild. I'll answer the second one first because it's easier. I just truly love talking about Lubitsch, and I don't often get the opportunity to do it. We sort of at different times tried to crack the code on, and now I can transition to the first question. My name is Griffin Newman. I host a podcast called Blank Check with Griffin and David, along with David Sims of The Atlantic. And we pick a director and go through their whole filmography, one movie, one episode at a time. And sort of about the idea of when people get blank check status at some point, where they get the sort of fuck you status, where they get to make whatever they want, at least for a period, to some degree. So much of that is, I think, the way we see it, because sometimes people suggest a director and we'll go like, that person had several hits, but I don't know if that person ever had a defined identity. They're sort of journeyman directors who ended up hitting gold a couple times, at least commercially, you know? But it was just sort of more like they got lucky this time. They were good craftsmen, you know? They were workman-like directors who were in the right place at the right time with the right people, whatever. No disregard to their ability, but it doesn't feel like they had ever synthesized what their thing was. And I think what really defines a blank check director for us so much is they have a level of success at some point, whether it's one movie or a series of movies in a row, where the industry sort of goes like, you have your thing figured out. That seems to work. It makes money for us. You know what you're doing, or it won some Oscars or whatever. I guess we just need to back off and let you do your thing. Like, we don't know how to explain how this worked. Someone like Ang Lee, who we covered, it's like, after Crouching Tiger, everyone just goes, we have no idea how that movie made that much money. It defies logic that that movie made $130 million domestic and got nominated for a ton of Oscars. And it's a very, like, moody, emotional, spiritual, I always mispronounce that word.
I think it's wuxia.
Yeah. Epic that crossed over to, like, you know, mall multiplexes. So I guess we have to let you do whatever you want with the Hulk. right? I guess we can't tell you what to do.
You can do weird transitions in Photoshop or
You
whatever
can do anything
on
because
explosions.
we would have noted Crouching Tiger to death, you know? So it's like the Evanses of the world, you know, the Robert Evanses, the people who would come in with better judgment and go, no, that won't work. This has to work. People back the fuck off. I've wanted to do Lubitsch for a while. He made so many films that I think we've struggled to figure out, is there a right way to put sort of ellipses around his career and only cover a period?
The trick is just to do the Berlin stuff. That'll get the butts in the seats.
Because I like stuff from the different periods. But anyway, all this to say, Lubitsch is such a good example because he has the Lubitsch touch, this term, you know, this idea that it was quantified of like, there was a thing this guy does better than any of his contemporaries that all the other guys are jealous of, and that no one can quite understand how he does it. And then still, you know, 75 years on from his death, I still think we think about that way, where it's just like, why have so few people been able to sort of conjure this thing that he had for a pretty long period of time, pretty consistently?
Yeah, and he was arguably the first German name brand director, period.
Yeah.
And one of the very few early American name brand directors. Lubitsch Touch was a marketing slogan before Master of Suspense.
Right. That's a great point, that not only was it like a term within the industry and within critics and whatever, but it was like a marketing handle. You've seen that Shop Around the Corner trailer.
I just showed that to Anya while we were in the coffee shop earlier
it's
today.
Unbelievable, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Ernst Lubitsch, our director. The man who gave you a Garbo in Ninotchka who made you laugh, and who now gives you a Morgan who makes you laugh.
I hope.
Yes, I hope so too.
The whole trailer is like pointing at this guy.
Yeah.
And being like, you don't understand. This is the man who makes all the movies you love. He's important. He's the selling point.
Now every Lubitsch picture is a classic of the screen. I'll show you how I make them. Let's pretend this is a scene. Everybody on the set, Herr Lubitsch has begun. Lights, action, camera. We are shooting number one. Am I ready? Yes. 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 I am ready. Mr. Lubitsch is a genius. He's a wow.
Our stars are now going out of their way to be like, you should be excited about this.
I mean, and in Sullivan's Travels, right?
Yeah.
Half the plot hinges on Veronica Lake wanting to move to Hollywood to work for Lubitsch. And it's never explained who this Lubitsch guy is. It's just on faith that the audience in 1940 will know who Ernst Lubitsch is.
Right. So he really is the thing we kind of look for in a blank check director. And those are the types of careers I find the most interesting to sort of like study and track and figure out and all of that. Beyond that, I love his movies. And Ninotchka is probably, gun to my head, my favorite comedy of all time. And is a movie I can just study endlessly, but also just enjoy endlessly. It never loses any magic for me.
Lubitsch at this point has so many films that I just unreservedly love. And they're from such a wide variety, you know, parts of his career. I mean, I keep a letterbox list of my top now 39 Lubitsch films, which is all of the ones I've seen. And I mean, in the top 10 are like The Doll from 1919, you got Student Prince from 27, and Clooney Brown from 46, and this is somewhere in the middle. At a certain point, I'm just amazed that, you know, one person can embody such a diversity of modes of comedy. And Ninotchka is such an interesting inflection point in his career in that way, where despite the fact that of all the films of his career, it was one of the most gun-for-hire jobs. It was a Garbo project.
Yeah.
Garbo wanted to do it. The first draft of the script was written by Gottfried Reinhardt, a person whose name you will not find in the credits because it was massively rewritten by a small unknown set of writers, namely Billy Wilder, Walter Reich, and Charles Brackett.
We'll talk about The Murderers Row in a second. But I was trying to watch, I didn't make it all the way through just because I was tired. I will finish it at some point. But I had never seen Silk Stockings, the Fred Astaire remake of this.
Yeah.
Which I think is pleasant, is like enjoyable.
It has a big problem, and that's that Sid Charisse is not Greta Garbo.
I think she's good in it.
Yeah, she does not embarrass herself at all.
Right, but it's like Garbo is giving one of the greatest performances in film history in this movie. Who could possibly try to top this? It feels like such a perfect merger point between a star sort of like self-knowingly commenting on her persona and heightening it, but also deconstructing it at the same time. I mean, the weird balance of this movie being like, you started out sort of turning all of the weird icy aloofness of Garbo, the unknowability, to like the max. But then you're also making the promise of like, she's going to laugh in this movie. We will start her at the highest point of sort of weird Garbo alienness.
Yes.
And then we will get to the point where we ground her and make her more human and relatable and knowable than she's ever been. Even if someone could technically give the same performance as her, I don't think it has the same weight without that sort of history behind her, the reputation, all that. But on Silk Stockings, there's an opening title card where it says, suggested by Ninotchka. And then I think it says, suggested by Ninotchka by, and then it credits that guy, the guy who said didn't get the screenplay credit on this.
Gottfried Reinhardt.
That's my memory. Perhaps I'm wrong about this, but I was taken aback because it wasn't one of the three names I recognized from.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I have not read the first version of the script. Unfortunately, there are only so many hours in the day. But Matt Severson, who is on our 4th episode, he actually got the censorship notes for about half his American films for me.
Yeah, you just sent me the Ninotchka file today, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I read the whole treatment for the Gottfried Reinhardt era version, circa May 1938.
Okay, interesting.
It's fascinating. The film ends with a trial of Ninotchka in Russia, where Cary Grant, playing the Melvin Douglas character, the characters are named Cary and Greta in this treatment, has to defend her and ends up buying the furs that she had gone to Paris to sell. So it's not jewels, it's furs. In this version, it looks like there's only one commissar, but at certain points there were 5, and they were serious characters. They were not comedic. It was not Felix Bressart and Stig Rouben. But I think most importantly, the kind of tenor of the screenplay was very different. You know, the central conceit behind the meet cute. I mean, really, it's a massive coincidence. The fact that they happen to meet on the same city block, despite being connected already, that does not occur. They know who each other are. There's none of that fizziness. They meet as enemies and then become lovers. It's fascinating.
It's one of the many things about this movie that astounds me in terms of how modern it feels in avoiding a lot of the tropes and keeping you surprised by where it goes in a genre that we know incredibly well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is they've actually created truly interesting inherent conflicts that are getting in the way of these two people ending up together. Rather than so many romantic comedies I hate are based upon a lie or a misunderstanding that goes uncorrected for 90 minutes until someone finds out, the bottom falls out, they get in a massive fight, and then they realize they want to be with each other, right? And when this movie starts and they run into each other on a street corner by chance, me watching this for the first time, I think like, okay, so this is going to be a shop around the corner thing, where they don't know that each other is the person that they're ostensibly sent here to be pitted against.
And that status quo lasts all of 15 minutes.
I was like, how long are they going to drag out the thing? And it's like, first off, they meet, they don't get along really, but she's sort of humored by him. They get together almost immediately.
Yeah, her arc, by the time they're on top of the Eiffel Tower and he's, done the cheesy dad joke thing of like, see that house over there? You know what's special about it? It's my batch bed. That type of thing. She is in. She's finding an excuse. She's finding a way to work around her ideology to get to his place because she wants to get with him.
They sleep together so quickly. They realize where they stand with each other. And then the rest of the movie is them trying to work that out.
Yes.
It's not, fuck, we can't, we have to lie, we have to pretend,
It's them trying to figure out a way to work around the machinations of geopolitics.
Yes, which is astounding. Astounding that the movie pulls that off. And also, I just think it has so much more comedic juice and it's also so much more emotionally affecting and romantic is these two people have very strongly held beliefs in their lifestyle, what they value in the world, what gives them joy, what gives them a sense of purpose. Those two ideologies are fundamentally against each other. It would be so easy to make these two characters mouthpieces for movements, which they are not. They are specific people who believe in the things that their lifestyles represent. They still are really, really interested in each other, despite those lifestyles being incompatible. And they both start to bring each other a little bit more towards the middle, maybe. And at moments, they're almost swapping positions. But it's them kind of feeling it out. And the central conflict is there a breaking point where inherently these two things can no longer coexist? Is there some moment where the rubber meets the road? They don't want to find it. They want to find the way to somehow make this sink. Neither one is resenting the other one. Neither one is trying to change the other one or break the other one. They're both sort of hoping they can find a way to make it work.
And it's so nuanced, right? Here's the initial elevator pitch for the film. The first sentence is written about this film, at least to try and pitch it to the studio. It is, Russian girl, saturated with Bolshevist ideals, goes to fearful, capitalistic, monopolistic Paris. She meets romance and has an uproarious good time. Capitalism not so bad after all. What I love about that is that the film does not live up to that description at all.
At all.
The film is often pitched this way. I even see this in like kind of modern, mostly leftist, which I'm very sympathetic to, takes.
Yeah.
Which are like, the film seems anti-communist, anti-socialist. No, the film is not capitalist versus socialism.
Yeah.
It's individuals versus machinations.
Exactly. And I think this movie is surprisingly pro-communism and socialism.
I mean, Leon starts reading Capital.
May I add, sir, it was with great amazement that I found a copy of Karl Marx's Capital on your night table, sir. That is a socialistic volume which I refuse to so much as dust, sir.
I'm not saying this like backhandedly, like let's give it faint praise sort of way. I think it is pretty invested in these political ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I think it mocks his lifestyle a lot more, despite the way that her ideology manifests in her behavior being funnier just because of her personality type. And it's a basic like comedic contrast thing of her being the pragmatic, unemotional, whatever. There's more comedic juice there. But like what you just read in the pitch feels like a movie that's making fun of those weird Rusky commies, right? Like that feels like it's a movie in which she has to learn to let go of her stuff and have fun, let her hair down, wear the silly hat, right? And the movie is not that. I think it takes everything pretty seriously politically that she stands for.
It gives Ninotchka the dignity of her ideals.
Yes.
She never renounces, in this case, Stalin-era socialism.
Yes.
And not only that, but to me, the gulf between her and Leon is not even so much their belief systems, it's how successful they are within those.
Yes.
She's a really good communist. Despite being an oppressed class of person by being a woman, she has risen through the ranks and clearly excelled to the point when they trust her to lead this band of incredible character actors. And Leon is a terrible capitalist.
Yeah.
He is a failure. He's had to resort to being a kept man.
Yes.
For someone he clearly does not feel anything for. And so you have a hyper-competent person with a massively incompetent person, and they connect despite that.
Leon has this life that's purely just sort of like pleasure and extravagance, and comfort and everything. But it's all kind of a bluff. It's based on, in a certain way, his own lack of identity, right? And that he needs to be floated by others. He needs to create this network of value in sort of him being able to be this middleman functionary who can set this person up with that person and get them the better deal on this, or be the arm candy for the party, or whatever the fuck it is, right? Whereas Ninotchka is like actually operating at the highest level of what she aspires to do. But what she aspires to do is a thing that is about sacrificing your own sense of self and identity and self-worth or self-purpose, individualism, let's say, more than anything, right? To the greater good. It's like this movie is so good at, I think, balancing the two of them in every way. Because I think it doesn't work if you feel like the thumb is on the scale in any direction, like he is belittling either of them. It would be so easy to also mock Leon as being some sort of completely frivolous, silly, superficial, socialite, which I think he's not. They both have, what's the Renoir, the Grand Illusion quote, the great tragedy of the world is everyone has their reasons. And it feels like this is a movie where 45 minutes in, the two characters realize that. And that is the central conflict they're trying to work past.
Yeah. The way the two characters' arc is so fascinating. I mean, Garbo's arc is very self-evident, right? She goes from basically Dr. Spock,
She's somewhere between Mr. Spock and the Terminator.
Exactly. Yeah. And hyper-competent, like a collectivist. She's a collective cog. And she learns how to get in touch with the feelings that were already there. But Leon's arc is just as interesting to me, where he basically discovers his purpose in life.
Yeah.
The entire climax of the film, which is a very interesting anticlimax, is just him doing some pretty heroic stuff to get her back all off screen. I mean, the only thing, we basically see him in that wonderful scene where he's trying to get through that customs agent.
It's a girl. So it is love which drags you to Moscow. Yes. No visa.
And then we see him again. He's on the balcony waiting for her. And it turns out the last 20 minutes of the film have been one chess game that he has somehow put together to get her back.
Like, that's also Lubitsch touch for me. It's a good example of it because there are all those famous stories of him getting to set and just pulling script pages out, right? And just being like, we don't need this. We don't need this. How do you take 4 pages and rewrite them into one line or a gesture or all of this? You talking about the original pitch, ending with her, the trial of Ninotchka. He's just so unconcerned with all that shoe leather. When it gets to the point where she gets sent back, where she makes the deal, right, and goes back to Russia, you kind of worry like, so is there now going to be 40 minutes to have to resolve this? And he just selectively realizes what shoe leather you don't need. He's so good at finding what are the scenes that will actually be entertaining to watch. What are the scenes that I can make into something of enjoyment? I don't want to put a scene in that ever has to just be plot driving. And it's more satisfying to like give the audience one and one and let them put 2 together to get that reveal of him on the balcony and realize, oh, he's done all this off screen. I didn't have to watch him go through 18 different bureaucratic processes. I saw the one. I saw how it went. I can imagine what he did in between.
That's the thing where it's in a world where, Lubitsch, he almost now kind of represents here's the way things were done in Hollywood. This is such a weird inversion of the 3-act structure where the climax is just us spending 15 or 20 minutes with Ninotchka really sad in Moscow where, she gets that devastating letter that's been redacted, the omelet that doesn't quite work.
That sequence is incredible. Yeah.
It's great. And it's basically plotless. It's just a day in the life of Ninotchka back unhappy. And then we cut 6 months later. And then, retroactively, it turns out that the entire climax, it happened off screen.
Yeah.
There was another great adventure that we didn't see because the script chooses to situate us in the most boring line of action that makes the ending 100 times more satisfying.
It's a thing I love about Lubitsch movies, and I love about Sturgis movies as well, who's my other favorite comedy director, is it feels like they never feel beholden to 3-act structure, and their movies can have 5 or 6 acts. You sort of go wherever is the most interesting place for the plot to go. And especially with comedies, we're talking about a lot of these high concept comedies, both from this era, but also modern ones. You have some setup. And then it feels like they design these movies around how do you maintain a sense of stasis for like 45 minutes to an hour at the middle, right? You have the setup, and then you need to stay in whatever the thing you set up was before there's some conflict that gets resolved. And you get to some midsection that just feels like sort of stasis, right? You're in a cul-de-sac. You're maintaining the sort of comedic setup of whatever. And I feel like Sturgis movies and Lubitsch movies in particular will, if they need to, veer wildly somewhere else for 20 minutes because it gets pretty boring as an audience to see just maintaining a status quo, even if it is a funny status quo.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go, well, then what would happen next? And then what would the repercussions of that be? It doesn't always have to be conflict-based, but it's like go wherever the movie is kind of telling you to go organically. Musically, you can have these lumpy acts. You can have movies like Lady Eve that just basically shift entirely into something else. The only movie I can think of in a modern way that I think does this well, and it makes sense that it was so hated at the time, and I think I didn't even like it when it first came out, and I rediscovered it, and having in the time in between gotten so into Sturgis and Lubitsch finally made sense to me. But the Coen Brothers' Intolerable Cruelty,
I've been meaning to rewatch that for 10 years.
Is the one modern movie that I think achieves this, where it's like every 20 minutes the movie just changes. It just changes. It goes into a new conflict. The characters go into a new environment. You introduce new characters. You drop a previous character, whatever it is. It's sort of like, what's the most interesting thing we could do right now? And sometimes it's about, holistically, you need this for the movie. It's a backwards thinking to start the movie from the perspective of her compatriots and Leon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Garbo enters the movie at minute 15-20.
Yeah, it takes her a while.
It takes a while.
And she's built up. It's true, like Orson Welles' starring role, right?
Yes, it's built up, and she just hits the ground running, and she's a fully realized comedic construction. The bit is clear.
I love, too, the way she's introduced, where you have the great bit where he looks like a comrade. You cut to a man who looks dead ringer for Lenin.
Yes.
And then immediately it's Heil Hitler with him and his, I'm presuming, wife.
That must be the one.
Yes, he looks like a comrade.
Heil Hitler. No, that's not him.
And so that immediately sets us up for the undercutting of it is the last person you expect.
We're going to start with her in this fully formed mode and then slowly kind of peel the onion and get to the real person underneath. Mm-hmm. But to basically give not the backstory, but like the character development of like, so what is she like in Russia at the end? We're only seeing what her status quo life was before she went to Paris, before she met Leon, after she's gone through all of this. And we're seeing the way that she is changed. There's a much more miserable version of that scene. The fact that she does find joy in it.
She's found her group of friends.
She's not self-pitying. She's heartbroken, but she's not self-pitying. It's not like, now I can't enjoy this.
And without romanticizing how horrible Stalinist Russia was.
Yeah.
But the film does not make that the point. The film does not make it, oh, I'm underneath this authoritarian system. No, it's just that she's found her happy place. She's been denied it. And that is the mechanics. It isn't, I mean, it's all politically charged, but it's not inherently just, hey, Soviet Russia, bad, Garbo needs to go.
And her ideals are sound. And she like follows what she preaches. And I think it comes from a true sense of humanism. Her belief is hard-won. She's not just taking marching orders. She's not just blindly following the decrees of a tricky leader, to say the least, you know?
In that way, it almost feels like I'm talking with unearned hindsight because I've seen the remainder of this podcast movies we're covering. But this feels of a piece with Shop Around the Corner's depiction of, the doldrums of capitalism, and To Be or Not to Be's depiction of the doldrums of fascism.
Yeah.
Where all three are films about people self-actualizing underneath various political systems.
You hit the nail on the head earlier, I think, but the fact that it's about the individual, right? It's about these two people figuring out who they are as individuals outside of these systems that they are part of. They need to divorce themselves from the sense of a greater, I don't know. I mean, yeah, Leon's whole life is about this sort of class system, spider web, interconnectedness, constantly staying in a position where this person owes a favor to him that he can cash in for that person, whatever, and it's like, no, it's these two people kind of figure out who they are.
Just in this moment.
Yeah.
Where Ninotchka has realized that she's the type that will laugh at a pratfall, but not at a dad joke.
Yes.
It's beautiful. I mean, there's something, extraordinarily relatable about that.
Yes.
I want to before I forget, because this is a momentous occasion in the podcast, where my favorite actor in any Lubitsch film makes his debut here. Felix Bressart, one of my favorite character actors ever, purely because of his work in these three films.
You say body of work. I think more than anything, like face of work. This guy is just has such an incredible look.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of these guys who you're just like, you were built to be a comedy character actor in the golden age.
He feels like the closest that Lubitsch ever got to putting himself on screen. And that includes the characters that Lubitsch played.
Yeah.
Because whenever Lubitsch is playing a character, he is this over-the-top figure. And Felix Bressart, who I should introduce him to the listeners, he plays one of the three commissars in this beginning.
Yeah.
He plays Purovich in Shop Around the Corner. And probably most notably, he plays Greenberg in To Be or Not to Be.
If you're going to be in 3 Lubitsch movies,
in those 3 roles,
it's pretty insane.
I do spend unreasonable amount of time quoting him, like his line about they can't censor our memories in this, which is the single most heartbreaking line reading in the entire film.
Yeah.
They can't censor our memories, can they?
In Shop Around the Corner, he has my favorite thing to quote ever, which is,
Craddock, she's dunking.
Well, why should she dunk?
All right.
And then in To Be or Not to Be, he has his entire Shylock monologue that he recites 3 times. That is just, if there's one moment in Lubitsch that I return to, it's his Shylock monologue in the end of To Be or Not to Be. And for me, him as the conduit for Lubitsch's ideals is so fascinating because in this film, he's the last holdout of the 3 commissars at all things. He's the one who holds on to his ideals the most, but even then, he's reasonable. He'll go, yeah, whatever, let's go for the royal suite.
Sure.
In Shop Around the Corner, he really only cares about avoiding his in-laws and just keeping his head down, out of trouble. He just likes his food. He likes his easy life. And then in To Be or Not to Be, he's the one standing up for humanism.
Yeah.
And I think all 3 of those things are related. All 3 of those things are the same shades of one kind of character type, which is someone who knows what's important in life. They have the priorities straight.
Yes.
And I love how he performs all these. I could go on for about 5 hours about Felix Bressart.
He's such a naturally goofy looking guy, and he's got a silly voice. To put his most strongly held beliefs in the mouth of that guy, it humanizes an actor who most directors, I think, would largely use as a bit of a prop. There's so many of these great character actors you watch, not Lubitsch movies, but lesser sort of comedies of this time, where, there were guys who just had a very distinctive look, a very distinctive sound. You could cast them as shorthand. If there's some functionary character, some side supporting character that you need to pop a little bit,
they bring the baggage that you don't have time to exposit.
Exactly. And it makes them distinct. They stand out. You pin them in your mind, whatever. But to take this guy and say, I'm going to put my most strongly held beliefs in him. I'm going to have him verbalize them. I'm going to use them to give him weight from the person you perhaps least expected from is really interesting to me. Lubitsch isn't expressing himself through his matinee idols.
No, he isn't. Melvin Douglas never... Actually, he does have some moments where he expresses ideals, but it's almost like they are local to this film in a way that Felix Bressart almost transcends this one movie, partially just because he's in 3 high-profile supporting roles. But there's something special about him. And you also have, I think this is the first appearance of Sig Rumen, who will come back as concentration camp Earhart.
Yeah.
Have you seen 1, 2, 3, the Billy Wilder film?
Yes, a while ago, but I have,
He plays the voice of the German lord who appears in the end of the film, but not the body, because he was dubbed over by Sig Rumen.
Interesting.
So he has this kind of relationship with both those directors. But yeah, so this feels like this is where the troupe that we're going to see over and over in the next few years of Lubitsch kind of solidifies
next
a
kind
little.
of miracle decade.
Yeah.
Cary Grant would have just overpowered this, right?
I go back and forth. Melvin Douglas in this film, I've heard the most diverse viewpoints on any performance in any Lubitsch film.
Really?
Because I think
he's beautiful in this. I have no complaints about his performance whatsoever. I think it's extraordinary. The first time I was watching it, I was surprised. He seemed like an odd casting choice for this. I think it's almost to the movie's benefit that that role is not played by someone with a Cary Grant amount of weight, because we're doing so much work around the Garbo persona as a star. If it's doing it twice, I don't know if it works. And I also just think we've seen Cary Grant play this type of guy so many times.
Yes, it's nothing new for him. Although, I mean, we do see that with hindsight, right? Because he hadn't played it that many times at that point,
That's a good point. Sure.
You know, we hadn't gotten, I think Philadelphia Story was the next year. But no, I think Grant would have been a different movie. I think it would have been, Grant is like my favorite.
Yeah.
One of my two probably favorite male leads of that era, along with Jimmy. But I wonder whether he would have had, because the most common complaint I hear about Melvin Douglas is that he's sexless.
Interesting.
I find that a bit ridiculous when, like, the way he delivers that one line, your corneas are excellent.
Yeah.
The whites of your eyes are clear. Your cornea is excellent.
Your cornea is terrific.
I think it's very sensual, this. Yeah. I also think there's something to the fact that, as we were saying, like, Leon's whole existence is a bit of a bluff, right? Like, he's sort of doing the Anna Delvey thing of he's rich by proxy of convincing other people he's rich and getting other people to pay for things for him.
Yes.
Right?
He says, what is it? It's my apartment. Well, I don't own it.
It has 3 rooms and a kitchenette dedicated to hospitality.
So it's your house.
Well, let's say I live in it.
Right. He sort of maintained the lifestyle by maintaining the lifestyle. It's a self-perpetuating illusion. It's not like Cary Grant hasn't successfully played, phonies or whatever, but it's almost like he would sell it too successfully. There's a little bit of extra effort that Douglas has to put onto this because he's not conventionally smoldering, Mr. Smooth.
You see the seams in the character Leon is playing.
Yes.
There's one moment that I wanted to highlight where when he first meets Garbo on that street, after they exchange a quick word, he has to kind of take a breath and walk all the way around that lamppost. And that is one of my favorite little bits of business in any of these movies. And you see him composing his next line, right? You see him going, what can I say to her? Let's go.
Right. And the fact that you see how much he cares, I mean, that's the big thing is I think he so fully sells being in love with her. I think you truly believe that he is fully enamored with this woman. The first scene, the chance meeting, all of his sort of failed passes at top of the Eiffel Tower, all that sort of stuff. You're like, is she just some weird fetish object for her? Why is he so imprinted on the idea of trying to bed this woman who is this odd, like, sort of robot alien, this beautiful, but like robot? You truly believe there's something that he is so fully enamored by with her immediately that only grows and deepens.
That kind of focus on the chemistry of people is something that I really foreground in a lot of these. Like The Merry Widow is similar, where it's two people who really they have no business being together, but they have a chemistry. For some reason, when they get together, sparks fly, and according to Lubitsch's morality, that's enough. So that's the best reason to get together.
I was sort of saying this earlier, but like that's the kind of conflict I want in a romantic comedy, is two people who shouldn't be together, but they have the chemistry.
Somehow
There's
it works.
An undeniable thing. And I think Cary Grant...
Is it too easy to imagine someone being with him?
There's that, right? You're a little surprised that she falls for Leon, or that she's even that attracted to him, the word go. But I also think him falling for her would have felt like a little bit of a goof.
Yeah, it's almost like he's too much of a playboy. I think Melvin Douglas is not, I would say, the most conventionally attractive man in Hollywood at the time. Like,
no,
I think he's a handsome guy, but
I do too. But he's a little wiry.
I'm a little extremist on this, but I think Cary Grant is like very good looking, like just an incredibly attractive man.
Think
in
most
my
people
opinion.
would disagree with you there. Yeah.
He wore the best suit ever in that one movie.
There's a reason we still basically use him as shorthand for the best male movie star can look.
I mean, Don Draper is just Cary Grant Northwest for the 21st century.
Right. George Clooney has spent 30 years trying to be Cary Grant. Now is maybe trying to transition to being Spencer Tracy. But yeah.
Is that what he's... Oh,
I think that's the best I want. I think he wants to be Spencer Tracy now.
Okay.
And I've heard him in a lot of interviews talk about how much he loves Spencer Tracy. And I think he just feels like, am I finally at the age where people will accept me being this grumpy?
Oh, I cannot wait for that part of his career. That sounds great. In this movie, you also have, the central love triangle. You have 3 actors, and it is interesting how Ina Claire, I've read in multiple biographies of Lubitsch at this point, that complain about her casting, that she's basically too old and unattractive for the role. I do think this is what this movie is operating on. None of the 3 leads are portrayed as the hottest people in the world. None of them. I mean, Greta Garbo is, famously beautiful lady, but made to look, like a cog in the Soviet machine. Melvin Douglas, no, he's no Cary Grant. Ina Claire, she looks like her character ought to look, right? She is her character.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I think viewing this as a love triangle is almost the wrong way to approach it because we said the whole thing is that like the two of them immediately have chemistry.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So the whole movie, the conflict is we want to see them together. They want to be together. This isn't one of those movies where it takes an hour and 15 minutes for the two characters to realize they like each other.
No, they immediately.
It happens so quickly that it's like she has to be an impediment to them. She can't be any threat to them in terms of actual emotion.
She represents capital.
Yes.
Yeah, she represents the outside world, right? She's everyone.
They both have these sort of leaders that they have to report to, that they're under the thumb of, that they're working for. She's the same as like Bela Lugosi in this. She's in it a lot more, but you don't think...
It's weird that Bela Lugosi's in this.
Hold the string! Hold the string!
It's very weird.
It's very odd.
I think it's interesting that they choose to frame her more as a tragic character, and I think play her with some genuine sympathy and humanity rather than make her an actual threat in terms of her and Leon having any actual connection.
She's someone who is clearly deeply lonely and hurt at some point and is now trying to grab onto one of the few connections she has, even if it...
The only way she can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have one angle that I'm really interested to talk with you about. This is in the context of Billy Wilder's career and the Wilder-Brackett kind of partnership.
It's another thing I love about this movie is I love anytime you get sort of like an intersection point between two major careers. Two auteurs somehow meeting in the middle for this one movie. I know it was not
They also
one
had
movie.
Bluebeard's Eighth Wife, which not quite as...
Yes, for these couple of years, let's say, right? But being able to somehow bring the best of what they both could do to the table.
Yes.
Yeah.
One thing that I find fascinating is we watched A Foreign Affair and also 1, 2, 3 in kind of this era. The amount of material that Wilder pilfered from this film is incredible. I mean, basically his entire depiction of authoritarian governments, but especially the Soviets, it's just he would remix everything he either innovated or worked on with Lubitsch in this movie. I mean, you have the boot-clicking Nazis even. The way they're portrayed is, especially ex-Nazis in 1, 2, 3, it's very similar. You have the play with the bureaucracy and the ideals in the making fun of the Russian climate. It all kind of starts here, and it's something that I think is one of his most common refrains for his career. There's an interesting quote from Wilder here that I found where he apparently was amazed by Lubitsch, where he said he wasn't just a gag man, he was the best creator of toppers. He would come up with a funny bit to end a scene, and he would create a better one. I think he thought of the bit where the picture of Lenin smiles back at Garbo.
Which I love, yeah.
He would look at stuff and go, ho ho, very good, and scratch out the next line. He'd read a bit more, ho ho, and scratch out another line. He purified. And that's what made him a great writer. I have no thesis here other than that's cool.
I have to ask you, because I did a deep dive on this recently, and I even called in some friends to see if they had any insight, and I could not get an answer to this. The anecdote that I feel gets repurposed a lot, but it will get quoted to different people in different circumstances, and I've never been able to get to the bottom of it, of what was this actually from, and did this thing ever actually get made? And sometimes it is attributed to this is a thing Lubitsch came up with. Sometimes it is, I feel excited as this is an example of a Lubitsch type move. I first heard this my very brief stint in film school. We were watching some Lubitsch movie in a lecture class, and the teacher was trying to define what sort of the Lubitsch touch was. And he gave the example of, which movie is it? It's one of the Chevalier ones.
Is this The Sword?
There's the sword one, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the one that everyone always cites with the king and the belt and the sword and everything.
Billy Wilder misattributed.
Yes.
Because he says it's from The Smiling Lieutenant. It's from The Merry Widow.
Right. I also always get those two movies confused. The titles, at the very least. Yeah. There's the other one that gets cited. And this is the thing, is sometimes I've heard it said, Billy Wilder had this quote talking about Lubitsch. Sometimes I hear it as, this is a thing that Billy Wilder did and someone else is telling the story. The thing with the hat in the elevator, do you know what I'm talking about?
I might, but I'm also horrible at remembering things.
They were writing the script, and it was they need to show that this couple who had been married for a very long time have lost the joy and the spark in their relationship. And they were writing scene after scene, 10 pages to try to explain it. And they were looking for the elegant, Lubitsch touch solution of how to dramatize this quickly in a poignant way. And depending on who you hear this from, Lubitsch comes up with this solution, or he doesn't, or he had nothing to do with this. The scene they come up with is old married couple in an elevator, not talking to each other. Younger woman walks into elevator. He takes his hat off, and the wife clocks it.
That's a really good bit. I cannot remember that from it. I mean,
I did some Googling and found like other people citing it, but no one seems to have any consistency on was this ever in a movie or was it in some sort of script breaking process for a thing that never got made? And if so, did Lubitsch write it? Was it a writer working for Lubitsch or with Lubitsch? I've heard it been said that it was Wilder working on something with Lubitsch. I've heard it said that it was, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always think of that as like, that's such a good encapsulation. And then I wonder, is it just made up? Is this some made up apocryphal thing I keep on hearing?
I wonder because this episode is kind of the odd one out in this era because we're actually right in the middle of the American silent era, kind of right now. And we just watched 3 or 4 films in a row where stuff like that just happens. Like endless stuff where you have some sort of, the marriage circle is like a 5-way, it's a love pentagon. And there's so many moments in that film or in Lady Windermere's Fan where someone notices their significant other do something that is on the surface innocuous in the presence of another woman or man. And that sort of object, it's always an object. Like the flowers, oh God, isn't the marriage circle or Lady Windermere's Fan, the flowers? That was Lady Windermere's Fan? Yes, thank you, Anya. Anya has a much better memory than I do. And so you have business, it's always with shoes, flowers, hats, that sort of thing. So I would not be surprised. That whole era of Lubitsch, and including this era, they're full of just, Lubitsch gets his characters to use objects to externalize their own inner lives in offhanded ways. I mean, in this, you have the first instance of the hats, which is you have that hat rack. You see the 3 flat top hats that the Bolsheviks wear, and then you dissolve to 3 very bourgeois looking top hats, which actually reminded us last viewing of The Merry Widow, where you remember the bit in The Merry Widow where the widow replaces all of her. First, it's her black dresses, the sort of white dresses, sequence. And then her black dog, the white dog, which is lovely and horrifying. But in this one, you have that, and then you have the even more key, the hat.
Yes.
The hat of the film.
It's this incredible way to externalize. In this case, I think it's less the internal lives of the characters and more the sort of ideological battle at the center of the movie, which is she clocks this hat at first, which looks like some Dr. Seuss shit.
Yes, it looks like the head of Cindy Lou Who.
Right, or like one of the mountains from Oh, the Places You'll Go or something. Yeah. It's this absolutely garish, sort of misshapen, lumpy, absurd thing you assume is probably like horribly colored, right?
It looks like it's a mustard. It looks mustard.
Yes. And she sees it and just immediately clocks it as like, this hat represents everything that is wrong with this society. This is the entire reason I believe in communist Russia is because who needs any shit like this? How much does this hat cost for that to wear that stupid thing on your head? She's obviously not wording it the way I do, right? But it's like this thing immediately becomes the encapsulation of everything wrong with the society that she is begrudgingly now having to spend some time in.
But it's the fanatic thing, right? It's a line from, I always quote the Alfredson Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, but so it's probably a John le Carre quote.
Because he's a fanatic, and the fanatic is always concealing a secret doubt.
That's the thing she hates the most.
Well, because you get basically the secret reveal when everyone else, it's one of those scenes where everyone else leaves the office and when the door is closed, she reveals that she has bought the hat, right? And it's when she's starting to sort of enjoy her life, feel some sense of individualism, and pleasure and pride as an individual woman. And Leon has started to sell her on the joy of fun. And she still will keep on referring to it as the silly, stupid thing. She knows it's dumb. She knows it's silly. She's almost embarrassed that she likes it. But she acknowledges, like, you can get true joy from things that are meaningless. I think one of the central conflicts of this movie is, I think he is mocking the sort of hollow, corpulent excess of bourgeois Paris culture at this time, as much as he is mocking the sort of joyless, functional, utilitarian sort of lifestyle of Russia.
And at the same time, though, Paris sparkles, and the Soviets kind of have a point.
Exactly.
As basic material, you may not be bad. But you are the unfortunate product of a doomed culture. I feel very sorry for you.
Oh, but you must admit that this doomed old civilization sparkles.
It is absurd, the way the Parisians live. The way they're throwing money around, especially when you're case in point, seeing them put up against people who barely have an egg to make an omelet, you know?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's a reason these things exist. She walks in there and sees this hotel room and is disgusted. Why would anyone ever need this much space? She's fundamentally correct, right? Even if she wishes they were in a shoebox, which is like, perhaps functionally, practically, you need more space than what Ninotchka would want. But what they have gotten is too much. It is too much. That having been said, it is nice to stay in a place like that. You start to see her take advantage of the room and sprawl out, put her own stuff there and hide the hat.
And to acknowledge the climate.
There's a reason like extravagance exists. It's because we do all want it as people. It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
You know, you absolutely look at the most indulgent, extravagant people with disgust. That's 50% of what Instagram is, right?
Mhm.
Is people looking at people just posting about how fucking great their lives are, and everyone either envies them or hates them, you know, because they want that or they're disgusted by it. But either way, you're getting to the central thing of like, whether or not anyone needs this, you do understand the pleasure that could come from it.
Yeah, it's like envy and disgust are very intertwined.
Right. And the hat thing, it's not even like she's eating caviar, right? It's not even like, well, you need food to eat. I'm eating the most extravagant food possible, and a food that's now been coded as a status symbol above all else. But I'm eating a more extravagant version of a thing I do basically need as a human. Versus the hat is purposeless. It is purely just a silly looking thing that she begrudgingly has to admit gives her some pleasure. And to go from, I can admit this only to myself in private with the door closed, to I can wear it with some amount of pride is an interesting journey for her.
It's interesting to the way that her previous status quo preference for the simple, for the down to earth, that's portrayed as not necessarily an ideological thing, but as an aesthetic as well, right? Where she wants to go to the place where the workers eat, not because it's the shortest distance, not because it's the most efficient, but because that's the clothes she has on.
Yes.
Where to, madame?
Can you recommend a restaurant?
Well, there's Grenier if you care for seafood.
Where do you eat?
At Père Mathieu.
Where's that?
It's just a place for workmen.
Where is it?
Yeah. And look, by the way, she's Garbo. She looks great in those clothes. Like, Garbo looks good in dark colors and straight lines and whatever, right? She's not wrong. But also, so much of the plot of this movie hinges on the jewels, right? The family jewels from the princess, which they want to retrieve and sell in order to distribute the money across the people and across the nation and all of that. So it's like the plot is hinging on a similar, an object of pure, extravagant status. It is disgusting that someone was able to leave our country with this and hold on to this value. This value can be retained by one person rather than an entire nation. And it's silly that this much value is invested on any one thing. But yet when she puts them on...
Yeah. It's interesting, too, the way the jewels are treated, where, because every time I watch this film, I'm expecting the film to be a little bit belittling of her. It's like, oh.
I truly believe it never is.
Exactly. And especially in the moment where, you know, she puts on the jewels or they open up the safe, and I'm always bracing myself for like the classic early 20th century moment of, oh, all women want to wear the jewels, right? But no, she puts it on as more of a way to mock all the people who want them, right? She goes into the speech to her imagined masses,
right?
You know, as if she was royalty.
Comrades, people of the world, the revolution is on the march. I know bombs will fall, civilization will crumble, but not yet, please. Wait, what's the hurry? Give us our moment.
She never becomes like Sandy at the end of Grease, who is now just fully rebuilt herself to be the model of what this guy wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, she gets drunk at the party the night when she's the most dressed up. She's still in the bathroom radicalizing women, you know?
Spreading the propaganda in the bathroom.
Right.
I'm very sorry, Count Algo. It is most embarrassing. But the lady you brought with you tonight is spreading communistic propaganda in the powder room.
Oh. Give me another double brandy.
And that's the thing where every time I watch that scene, I'm expecting a conflict between the two. Like for Leon to go, you shouldn't do that. And for her to go, I know, I get it. But no, they just go home and they're like laughing about it.
You watch this movie constantly dreading the obvious, annoying fight scenes you imagine have to be coming that never come.
Mm-hmm. The film never goes for the obvious conflict, except in the moments that it absolutely needs to drive the plot forward, like with Ina Claire.
And it will either find a way around them, find the quickest way through them, or find the most entertaining way to make it pop. But I mean, yeah, the Anya Claire scene where she sort of lays down the law to Leon is the only scene in this movie. And I think it is a good scene, and it helps that it's the one scene where you start to sort of get a glimpse into the true loneliness of this woman.
You know, when she confronts Garbo, especially, where it's like she has this aura of, you know, I have the upper hand here, and I'm going to explain to you in great detail exactly the upper hand I have, and I know how this is going to end. So get out of here.
But it's also, she knows the thing that hurts her the most, which she has to basically admit in that scene, is I have an ability to make him spend time with me. I cannot make him want to spend time with me. And you have that.
Yeah.
You have the ability of he wants to be with you, which I can never compete with.
This whole film is so suffused with sadness, every single part of it.
I think basically every character in this movie is sad.
Yeah, exactly.
Fundamentally, like on a base level.
And some of them do a better job of hiding it than others, right? But like, I mean, in every given scene, there's usually at least one moment where something peeks in of like the characters fighting back their dread, fighting back their sinking feeling. Like even that lovely scene at the party where, you know, they're getting drunk. She gets drunk to ward off that voice in the back of her head telling her this is not going to last.
Yeah.
It's really sad, you know, when she's at her happiest, she's really doing her best at masking her sadness. That's great. I gotta talk about the door scene, though. This might be the ne plus ultra of Lubitsch door scene.
Okay, interesting.
The scene where the three Bolsheviks, three commissars, have ordered room service.
Oh,
and
yes.
We don't cut to a shot of them partying. We cut to a door. We see waiter come in. Hey! We see the girl with the cigars come in. Hey! And she leaves as if like you think like the worst of like, oh no, they've done some bad things. But no, she comes back with two others because she sold out. It's a disarmingly lovely moment where you're expecting a shoe to drop at some point, but it doesn't until another turn of the plot that has nothing to do with this. The film just lets them have their fun.
Yeah, it's so wild to really open the movie with those guys. It is a thing I miss, which I love, like 15 minutes of getting you into the world of a movie through not your characters. It's sort of the C-3PO R2-D2 thing.
Yeah.
Which I hate that George Lucas kind of drops more and more as those movies go on. I mean, and that's so pulled from The Hidden Fortress. Right, but that was his in of like, I like the idea of telling this epic story from the two least important characters in the universe, right? And the first 30 minutes of Star Wars where you're just watching two robots bumble their way around different environments and they don't affect the plot at all. They're just sort of witnessing things happening. And I think with comedies, it works particularly well to do that. It's funny because there's a little bit of a mystery to trying to solve in these first 15, 20 minutes. What are these guys doing? Who are they really? What are they here for? The gag with them constantly coming in and out through the revolving door of the lobby of the hotel. And then later them explaining the buzzing, the different rules of how many times you ring and what you get, all that sort of stuff. It also just helps. It makes your side characters matter because we've started with them. We're always going to be innately drawn to them, feel compelled to them. The deeper we get into a movie, they're the characters we've been with the longest. When they show up at the end in Ninotchka's room with the omelets, you're so happy to see them again.
Yeah, it's like the old friends coming back and there's echoes of the first scene. The first scene is that, you know, they have this kind of weird rapport where one guy will say something to them and then they'll go,
But gentlemen, I'm afraid.
He's always afraid.
They bring that back only for the last scene, for the very ending.
We'll care about our movie stars when they enter because they're movie stars. That's their superpower. The plot's going to be hung on their shoulders. We understand. It's kind of smart to start with supporting characters and fully immerse yourself in the world through their eyes as a starting point so that the corners of the film feel more developed. Whereas if you open the film on Ninotchka getting off the train, you're plopped right in the middle of it. And I think those guys always will feel a little superficial to you. Or not superficial, but jokey.
It's not oblique enough for Lubitsch, right? In his best work, he never finds the way into the plot you think he will. The Marriage Circle, which we recently watched, you start on two characters who are played by wonderful actors. They're not the lead couple. After about 20 minutes, without realizing it, you've shifted your protagonists, different leads.
That's the greater point. Thank you for outlining so well. It's that sense of a Lubitsch movie starts and you go, I thought this was about blank. I thought this person was in that. And you're watching 15 or 20 minutes before it gets to the thing that the poster was basically selling you. And you started going, how are we going to get from A to B? Not to mention, I thought A was the poster. I thought we were going to start on A, and you're telling me now what I thought was A is B, and I don't understand how we bridge that gap.
It takes Garbo 45 minutes to laugh.
Right. It's like, that's a fun part of it. Another modern equivalent, and it's weirdly, I watched a lot of Simpsons during lockdown. I was sort of trying to see how
it's a good decision.
far I could get. Can I make it through all of it? Could I catch up all the way to present day?
You tried to go through all of
I tried to do...
No, I'm so sorry for your loss.
Tapped out at a certain point. I kind of now have heard the last season or two has picked up again, and now I want to like fill in the gap of the 8 seasons I haven't watched, but I watched too much of it. At some point, like season 10 or 11, when the show's sort of cresting past its peak, they do start doing that thing where like act 1 of every Simpsons episode is basically a plot line that has nothing to do with the rest of the episode. It's the one thing I like about the second era of The Simpsons is they start doing that thing where you go like, I thought this episode was about, and it takes until the first ad break to get to basically the setup point that you thought we were going to start with as a given. And I just always think that's fun. It's a way of weirdly, I think, drawing the audience in more because you're not just sort of going like, okay, I know, let's get through the setup. I understand what the starting point needs to be here. I bought the ticket. I saw the poster. I saw the trailer. I understand what we're getting to. Let's get on with it. That you're already sort of trying to do the math in your head. You're doing the work as an audience member of like, why are we starting here and where are we going and how do we get there?
I always kind of likened it to the James Bond intros, right? Half the time they're nothing to do with the plot. It's just a way to set the tone, or just, hey, we had the O2.
Right.
It's this fun way of kind of slyly giving you something a little different than you were expecting. And I think To Be or Not to Be is probably my favorite example of that, where you get 20 to 30 minutes of essentially a relationship comedy. A classic older married couple, young hot pilot played by Robert Stack comes in, upsets the balance. You're laughing at these actors. And then you get half an hour of drama. There's not a laugh to be found for 20 or 30 minutes in that movie. And then you get this final form of the movie, which is this utterly, sickeningly funny satire for about an hour. He'd do that over and over. I mean, even Clooney Brown opens with two characters who are not at all significant to the plot.
But I think that's the key to the Lubitsch touch kind of thing, is that like he understood his elegance was in service of, to simplify it greatly, show don't tell, and show in the most interesting and, if possible, funny way that you possibly can. Because he understood if you tell the audience what they need to know, they start to get a little bit bored. It becomes a little bit of a classroom situation where someone is just relaying information to you, versus if you let them have to do the work. And it's a thing I think a lot of modern filmmakers have lost, especially in comedy.
Oh, yeah.
Is like the audience wants to do some work.
It's a collaborative medium with the audience, right?
They want to be drawn in. They want to feel smart. Like audiences want to feel smart by somehow putting the thing together the moment before it's said to them. And if you can avoid ever saying it directly, all the better, because then they feel smart for the whole fucking movie.
There's this lovely video Dave Kerr did about the restoration of Rosita, where he explains what, in his view, makes silent films different than sound films fundamentally, which is that with silent films, more than with most sound films, I think it's all generalizations, but I get his point, the audience has to complete the movie. With silent films, you get people talking, you can't hear them. Oftentimes, especially in those Lubitsch silents, you are having to infer what they're saying because you're not given title cards half the time. It feels like Lubitsch just kept carrying that forward. You have to finish his jokes. He'll often either deny you the punchline or the premise, sometimes both.
Right.
And that's the most rewarding jokes, right? Where it's a sword thing, right? Where you've figured out that this man has been cuckolded because of the belt is the wrong size. That's like 3 degrees of separation between the act, the object, and the offense.
The thing when you watch really great silent comedies is they almost use the telecard as a comedic device, not in just, well, this is the easier way to get the verbal joke out. An easier thing to do is just to write a funny thing on screen and show it to them, say it directly, right? I think you watch good silent comedies, the flow of things is almost always you get a sort of close-up shot of the actor responding, saying the thing, and you don't know, as you said, with someone like Lubitsch, he's not going to give you telecards for every moment, for every time you see them flapping their lips. So you're held in a little bit of suspense of which things are they going to choose to actually tell me.
That is a phenomenon that, especially during his Berlin films, it's so interesting.
And when you get a good close-up of something or someone giving a big emotional reaction or comedic reaction or something, there's an immediate suspense to, am I going to be told what it is? If I am, what is it? And so often they will use it to sort of surprise you in, from the energy of that person acting, I was not expecting that's what they were saying.
Yeah, there's the suspense of how long can this keep going before I'm given something verbal? And it feels like it took Lubitsch a while to actually get a grasp on that. Like, if you've had the dubious honor of seeing his first couple of surviving films, it's clear he has not figured out 2 things. Well, actually, it's one thing, but he falls on both sides of it constantly. He either over exposits too many title cards, you will get the joke, and the title card will just be the joke that you just got. Or he'll have a conversation where you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to infer in here because I don't have enough information. You've given me one puzzle piece. I need at least 2.
It's a difficult balance.
Yeah.
But it's that understanding of like telecards not as a shortcut, dialogue not as a shortcut, but can be its own visual gag. You know, I think so much of the honing of the Lubitsch touch thing is what you were just saying, that process of him figuring it out, realizing like what information absolutely needs to be delivered to the audience directly and cleanly and clearly for them to understand, to have any grip on the scene, versus what stuff do you not need to tell them? What can be skipped over? That's an earned skill set you only develop through making films and watching the audience response and making films, especially in a time where you had less easy tools to be able to convey information.
I don't have much to follow that up with because that's such a good summation of kind of the tenor of this episode. It's really good. I'll cut me saying that because that's good. But sometimes I leave in me saying, I'll cut me saying that as a joke.
No, you should keep it in.
Yeah,
I think.
always.
I've sort of been stewing on the thing you said about like chemistry being the thing that Lubitsch places the greatest premium on in the world. That's like the ultimate currency of the world for him, right?
Chemistry is an absolute good. It's this thing where it's actually moral value to 2 people just vibing.
Not only an absolute good, but arguably the absolute good. It is the one thing. And I don't know. I'm not going to turn this into a therapy session. I've been doing my own work and working through whatever in terms of my history of relationships and all of that. But it's a thing I've been going back to a lot. You scan over like failed or, at least just past relationships in your life. You try to establish the patterns of why didn't those work? Where was the incompatibility? What was the thing we couldn't work past, right? Because I'm not someone who comes out of it being like, well, I hate them. The reason that relationship ended is because they were terrible. They're crazy,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty unhealthy to come out of relationships and be like, unless you're with someone who is demonstrably an evil person. There's a reason you want to be with that person in the first place. And very often when things fall apart, they fall apart because of practical circumstances that are just fundamental incompatibilities that you try to work past and at some point maybe surrender to. But I think the thing that Lubitsch taps into, which is such an optimistic viewpoint, it is really the thing where you're like, well, that's the whole, basically, as far as I'm concerned, the meaning of life, as if there is one, why we do any of this, what we strive for, what is the joy in life is just those moments where you feel something that genuine with another person. And if you're lucky enough to figure out any way to sustain that across your life, at the very least, that's something. That's really something, And I think the fact that he taps into that being such an odd, intangible thing, it can exist in spite of logic or circumstance, And so often I think we accept that two people fall in love in a movie because they have to fall in love in a movie, because they're the two people on the posters, because they're the two top billed actors, because that's what the plot demands or whatever. But it was a thing that he was able to synthesize so well. I don't think there's any Lubitsch film in which the leads do not actually have chemistry that I have seen. You have seen more than I.
There's some, his less successful ones sometimes have leads where you're like, oh, they hadn't quite figured out how to portray the chemistry they wanted to. Once in a very, very rare while.
They're varying scale. They're more and less successful examples of it in the films I've seen. But I think he was good at figuring out how to make movie stars, or at least his leads, harmonize in that kind of way, rather than just two people giving 2-star performances, both being charismatic and alluring and attractive, and then we accept that, of course, they have to kiss at the end. It was never a perfunctory thing for him. That was the whole thing, because you're right. I think that is his most strongly held belief and value in life, is that he's working through all these questions of the individuals trying to exist within these systems, and the only thing that he knows to be fundamentally true is what we mean to each other. If we're lucky enough to find those people and make those connections. And I think it's as much in her friendship with her 3 comrades as it is in her romance with Leon, I think it is the absolute value of that final omelet scene. And to call it a scene is almost reductive, because it's almost like an act of the film. It's like a little 15-minute play in the middle of the movie, but it is
totally new conflicts and characters.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and Ninotchka starts out at the beginning of the movie. Not only do you imagine she could never fall in love, could she ever surrender herself and be as vulnerable as to fall for someone like Leon or anybody? The pure love she expresses for them as friends is a thing it feels as impossible to imagine her doing at the beginning of the movie. For her to have the vulnerability to admit that she cares about them, and that if she's with them, she's happy. Even if they barely have the ingredients for an omelet, even if she has her fucking grumpy roommate,
the informer,
trudging in and out of the room with her tuba music and whatever. But this is what matters. These people, and that what came out of this entire experience was this bond they had that's never going to be broke.
I can't think of a better way to express it than that. That was lovely. Throughout his films, the tenor of his films are about, does that bond survive, right? You have Student Princeton of Heidelberg, which is out of print, has never been in print. It's a tragedy because you have this incredible spark between two people, and they're denied it because of the exact same stuff that happens in Ninotchka, because of tradition, because of ideology that is separate from that.
And he's making films across very oppressive times in human culture.
And
he's going through different waves, whether they're cultural or political or whatever they are, and waves of artistic oppression as well. It's a very oppressive and suppressive time. And for him to make movies that are that swooningly romantic and idealistic in this idea of people truly being able to identify this unquantifiable thing that is chemistry.
In lieu of me trying to follow that up, I'll say that thank you so much, Griffin Newman, for making the time for a funny Canadian cinematographer to waltz into your city and record about German director who I have no connection other than from my heart to. It's been lovely.
I'm very happy it happened. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's episode 41 of the Offer Fan Podcast. Join us next week as we talk about episode 2. Next week, Donald Brackett joins us to discuss more Ninotchka, as well as the collaboration between its writers, Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett. Head over to ernstcast.com for information as to where you might find the films we'll be discussing this season, and other resources such as show notes and our Discord server. How Would Lubitsch Do It is a production of Moving Image Agency. Griffin Sheel was our dialogue editor for this episode. Anna Shatek-Scott was our recording engineer. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you happen to use. It helps other people find our podcast and therefore find Ernst Lubitsch. We'd like to acknowledge that this podcast was produced on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples.